Brad Pitt stepped out of the black SUV and onto the red carpet. The summer evening in Washington, D.C. was warm, and he adjusted his black bow tie as camera flashes lit up around him. The Hope for Children Charity Gala was one of the biggest events of the season. Politicians, celebrities, and wealthy donors all came together for one night to raise money for kids in need. Brad smiled and waved at the reporters who called his name. He had been to many events like this before. At 59 years old, with his blonde hair now showing touches of gray, he was still one of Hollywood's most famous faces. He moved down the carpet slowly, stopping to sign a few autographs for fans who had waited hours behind the velvet ropes. "Mr. Pitt, who are you wearing tonight?" a reporter called out. "Just a classic Tom Ford," Brad replied with a casual smile. He didn't care much about fashion talk, but he knew it was part of these events. Inside the grand ballroom of the Jefferson Hotel, over 300 guests mingled under crystal chandeliers. The room buzzed with conversation and soft classical music played by a small orchestra in the corner. Waiters in white gloves moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and small fancy foods. Brad made his way through the room, shaking hands and exchanging quick greetings with people he knew. He was here as a special guest because he had donated $1 million to the charity last year. The charity's director, Martha Wilson, had personally asked him to attend. "Brad, so wonderful you could make it," Martha said, approaching him with open arms. She was a tall woman in her 60s with silver hair and a warm smile. "Your support means the world to us." "Happy to help, Martha," Brad said as they hugged briefly. "The work you do for these kids is amazing." Martha touched his arm gently. "We've seated you at table 1 near the stage. Some interesting folks at your table tonight." Brad nodded and made his way to the table. He noticed the name cards as he approached. To his right would be Senator James Miller, someone Brad had met before and respected for his work on education. But the name on the card to his left made him pause for a moment. Karoline Leavitt. He recognized the name. Karoline Leavitt was a rising political figure who had recently become the press secretary for President Trump in his new term. At just 27 years old, she was known for her sharp tongue and fierce defense of conservative policies. Brad had seen her on TV news shows many times, often in heated arguments with reporters. Brad sat down and greeted Senator Miller with a handshake. Two older couples at the table, major donors to the charity, introduced themselves with excited smiles. Brad was used to this, the slightly nervous energy people had when meeting him for the first time. He was taking a sip of water when a stir at the entrance caught everyone's attention. Karoline Leavitt had arrived, walking in with 2 serious-looking men who appeared to be security. She wore a fitted navy blue dress and her long brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. Despite her young age, she moved with the confidence of someone much older. The room's energy shifted slightly. While Hollywood stars like Brad were common at these events, someone from the current administration was a different kind of celebrity in Washington. People watched as she made her way across the room, stopping to speak with several politicians and business leaders. Brad observed her as she approached their table. He had no personal issues with Karoline, but they certainly had different views on most political topics. He had spoken out against many policies she defended daily on TV and social media. Still, this was a charity event. Politics could be set aside for one night. "Mr. Pitt," Karoline said with a professional smile as she reached the table. "I didn't expect to be seated next to Hollywood royalty tonight." Brad stood and extended his hand. "Ms. Leavitt, nice to meet you." Her handshake was firm and brief. "I've seen all your films. Fight Club is actually one of my favorites." "Thank you," Brad said, a bit surprised. "Not what I would have guessed." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What would you have guessed?" Brad smiled carefully. "I try not to guess about people I just met." She nodded and took her seat beside him. The slight tension between them was noticed by others at the table, but everyone kept their polite smiles. Dinner was served as Martha Wilson took the stage to welcome everyone. Brad ate his salad and tried to make small talk with Karoline, sticking to safe topics like the food and the charity's work. She responded politely but briefly. "So, what made you support this particular charity?" Karoline asked eventually, between bites of her chicken. I believe every child deserves a fair start in life, Brad explained. This organization makes sure kids in tough situations get education, health care, and safe places to live. Things that should be basic rights. Karoline nodded. Noble goals, though we might differ on how best to achieve them. How so? Brad asked, genuinely curious. Well, she said, placing her fork down, I believe in teaching people to fish rather than giving them fish. Government handouts create dependency. Private charity is good, but it works best when it helps people help themselves. Brad took a slow sip of his water before responding. These are children we're talking about. They can't help themselves until they've been given the basics to survive and grow. A photographer approached their table and asked if he could take a picture of them together. Both Brad and Karoline agreed, leaning in slightly and smiling for the camera. The flash popped 3 times. That will be all over social media within the hour, Karoline said after the photographer left. People will wonder what we found to talk about. Maybe we found common ground, Brad suggested. Did we? She asked with a small smile. Before Brad could answer, a reporter from Entertainment Weekly approached their table. Mr. Pitt, can I get your thoughts on the administration's recent cuts to arts funding in public schools? I know you've been a supporter of arts education. Brad felt Karoline stiffen beside him. He knew his answer could easily start an argument, but he also wasn't one to hide his views. I think it's a mistake, he said honestly. Arts education helps kids think creatively and express themselves. Studies show it improves performance in other subjects too. Cutting these programs hurts the kids who need them most, those whose parents can't afford private lessons. The reporter nodded and scribbled in her notebook. Ms. Leavitt, would you like to respond to that as a representative of the administration? Karoline straightened in her chair. The administration is making necessary budget adjustments to focus on core academic subjects. Parents who value arts, education are free to seek it outside of school hours. We believe in parental choice and fiscal responsibility. The reporter looked between them, clearly hoping for more of a clash. But Martha Wilson approached the table at that moment. Brad, Karoline, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're about to start the auction. Brad, would you mind saying a few words before we begin? You've seen our work firsthand in New Orleans. Of course, Brad agreed, standing up. As he moved toward the stage, he heard Karoline speaking quietly to the reporter. He couldn't make out the words, but her tone was firm and controlled. On stage, Brad spoke briefly about visiting one of the charity centers and meeting children whose lives had been changed by their programs. He ended with a personal pledge to match donations up to another $1 million that night. The crowd applauded warmly. When he returned to the table, he noticed Karoline was texting rapidly on her phone. She put it away as he sat down. Nice speech, she said. Very inspiring. Thank you, Brad replied, trying to read her expression. You know, she said, leaning slightly closer and lowering her voice. I admire your passion, even if I disagree with some of your views. But I have to wonder if Hollywood celebrities truly understand the real economic challenges facing everyday Americans. Brad felt a familiar tension building, the beginning of what could become a heated political discussion. And as dessert was served and the auction began, he realized this unexpected encounter with Karoline Leavitt might not stay as polite as he had hoped. Around them, phones began to light up as the photo of them together started circulating online. Neither of them knew yet how much bigger this story was about to become. The charity auction continued as waiters cleared away the dessert plates. Brad sipped his coffee and watched as wealthy donors raised their hands to bid on luxury items. A weekend at a beach house in the Hamptons went for $30,000. A signed guitar from Bruce Springsteen sold for $45,000. All the money would go to help children in need, which made Brad smile despite the growing tension at his table. Karoline checked her phone again. The photo of her and Brad sitting together had already gotten thousands of comments online. Some people were happy to see two people from different sides talking. Others were angry and posting mean comments about both of them. Your fans don't seem too happy about you sitting with me, Karoline said, showing Brad her screen. Look at these comments. Brad glanced at her phone but didn't take it. I don't worry much about online comments. Most people typing angry words have never met either of us. That's a luxury you have as an actor, Karoline replied. In politics, we have to care what people say. Public opinion matters. Maybe that's the problem, Brad said. Too much focus on what plays well online instead of what's actually right. Karoline raised an eyebrow. And Hollywood celebrities know what's right for America better than the people they elect? Before Brad could answer, Martha Wilson returned to their table with an older man in a dark suit. Brad, Karoline, I'd like you to meet Richard Thornton. He's the CEO of Global Media Networks and one of our biggest supporters. They both stood to shake his hand. Richard Thornton was in his 60s with thick white hair and sharp blue eyes. His network owned dozens of TV channels and news websites. Quite the interesting pair we have here, Richard said, looking between Brad and Karoline. My news director would kill for an on-camera conversation between you two. Martha's eyes lit up. Actually, that gives me an idea. We plan to have a short panel discussion after the auction about the importance of helping children. Would you both be willing to participate? Just 10 minutes of conversation. It would really help our fundraising efforts. Brad hesitated. He had only planned to give his speech and enjoy the rest of the evening quietly. A public discussion with Karoline could easily turn into a political debate. Karoline didn't wait. I'd be happy to, Martha. Always ready to discuss important issues. All eyes turned to Brad. Saying no now would make him look afraid or unwilling to support the charity. Sure, he said finally. Happy to help. Martha clapped her hands together. Wonderful. We'll set it up right after the auction ends. As Martha and Richard walked away, Karoline smiled at Brad. Don't worry, Mr. Pitt. I'll go easy on you. Brad gave her a steady look. I've been in this business for over 30 years, Ms. Leavitt. I can handle myself. The auction ended 30 minutes later, raising over $2 million. With Brad's matching pledge, the charity had secured over $3 million for their programs. The crowd was in a good mood, drinking champagne and chatting happily. Martha returned to the stage and tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we end this wonderful evening, we have a special treat. Please welcome to the stage Brad Pitt and Karoline Leavitt for a short conversation about the future of children's welfare in America. The crowd applauded as Brad and Karoline made their way to the stage. 2 comfortable chairs had been set up, with a small table between them holding water glasses. Martha would act as the moderator, standing at a podium nearby. As they took their seats, Brad noticed several people in the audience holding up phones to record. What happened next would definitely end up online. Thank you both for agreeing to this impromptu discussion, Martha began. Let's start with something simple. Why do you personally care about helping disadvantaged children? Brad went first. I believe all children deserve the same chances in life. I was lucky to grow up with what I needed, but many kids don't have that. When I visit the centers this charity runs, I see kids with incredible potential, who just need some support and stability to thrive. It shouldn't matter where a child is born or how much money their parents have. Every kid deserves food, safety, education, and health care. The audience applauded. Karoline nodded politely before speaking. I agree that children deserve our support. My approach comes from my conservative values. Strong families are the best foundation for children. Government programs can help in emergency situations, but they can't replace good parenting and community support. Private charities like this one do amazing work because they're more efficient and personal than big government programs. More. Applause followed, though Brad noticed it wasn't quite as enthusiastic. Martha asked another question. How do you feel about the recent budget changes affecting children's programs? This was a more direct political question, and Brad could feel the mood shift. He chose his words carefully. I'm concerned about the cuts to education, health care, and food assistance for children. These aren't luxuries. They're basic needs. When we cut these programs to save money, we're really just creating bigger problems for the future. Children who grow up hungry or without proper health care or education often need more help as adults. Karoline leaned forward in her chair. What Mr. Pitt fails to mention is that these budget adjustments are necessary to address our national debt, which is a burden we're placing on these same children in the future. We're focusing resources where they're most needed and eliminating waste and overlap in programs. Our administration has actually increased funding for programs that show measurable results. Brad shook his head slightly. I've seen the numbers, and that's simply not accurate. Funding has been cut for school lunches, after-school programs, and children's health care. These are programs with proven benefits. With all due respect, Mr. Pitt, Karoline said, her voice taking on the sharp tone she used in TV interviews. Hollywood celebrities often speak about these issues without understanding the complex budget realities. Easy to talk about spending more when you're not the one figuring out how to pay for it. The audience grew quiet. The friendly charity discussion was turning into something else. I may not be an economist, Brad replied calmly, but I can read a budget report. And I've seen firsthand what these programs mean to real children. This isn't about politics, it's about priorities. Karoline smiled tightly. Everything is about politics, Mr. Pitt. And the reality is that your Hollywood friends live in a bubble far removed from the average American family. The policies you support often hurt the very people you claim to want to help. Martha tried to redirect the conversation. Perhaps we could focus more specifically on the charity's work. But Karoline continued. The American people elected this administration because they were tired of being talked down to by coastal elites who think they know better. People like you make movies in your gated communities, then lecture working families about what they should believe. Brad felt his jaw tighten. The conversation had moved far beyond the charity's mission. He could see people in the audience looking uncomfortable. I grew up in Missouri in a middle-class family, he said. I worked odd jobs before I found success in acting. I don't claim to speak for all Americans, but I do believe in standing up for children who can't stand up for themselves. Noble words, Karoline said. But actions matter more than words. This administration is creating jobs and economic growth that will lift families out of poverty. That helps children more than any government handout. The tension on stage was now obvious to everyone. Photographers were taking pictures rapidly, and more phones were raised to record the exchange. Martha stepped between them. I think we should wrap up this discussion and thank our guests for their time. But it was clear to everyone in the room that what had started as a friendly charity panel had turned into something much more heated. And as Brad looked out at the sea of phones recording every word, he knew this was only the beginning. Martha Wilson's attempt to end the panel discussion came too late. The tension between Brad and Karoline had grown too strong to simply walk away from. Several reporters who had been covering the charity event moved closer to the stage, sensing that this exchange was becoming the real story of the night. Before we conclude, Karoline said, ignoring Martha's attempt to wrap things up, I'd like to address something Mr. Pitt said earlier about the administration's policies. Brad could see Martha's worried expression. This charity event was supposed to be about helping children, not political arguments, but the conversation had already gone too far to turn back. Go ahead, Brad said, gesturing for Karoline to continue. You mentioned cuts to children's programs, Karoline said, her voice taking on the confident tone she used in press briefings. But what you and other critics never acknowledge is that many of these programs have been failing our children for decades. Throwing more money at broken systems isn't compassion, it's waste. Brad leaned forward. So your solution is to take away food and health care from kids while you figure out a better system? These aren't abstract budget numbers we're talking about. These are real children going to bed hungry tonight. The audience was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped clearing tables to watch the exchange. That's exactly the kind of emotional, simplistic argument that prevents real solutions, Karoline replied. No one wants children to go hungry. But the question is how best to help them long term. Creating jobs and opportunity for their parents is more effective than government dependency. Brad shook his head. Why does it have to be either or? Why not support families and make sure kids have what they need right now? Because resources aren't unlimited, Karoline said. Choices have to be made. And frankly, Mr. Pitt, it's easy for someone with your wealth to suggest spending more of other people's money. A murmur went through the crowd. The conversation had clearly moved beyond a friendly discussion about charity. Richard Thornton, the media CEO, stood up from his table near the front. I have a question, if I may, he called out. Martha nodded reluctantly, and he continued. Mr. Pitt, you've been vocal about your political views in the past. Are you planning to actively campaign against the administration in the coming years? Before Brad could answer, Karoline jumped in. Hollywood has been campaigning against this administration since day one. The entertainment industry spends millions trying to influence public opinion while claiming to speak for the common person. I didn't ask you, Ms. Leavitt, Richard said firmly. I asked Mr. Pitt. Brad took a deep breath. He hadn't come here planning to make political statements, but he also wasn't going to back down now. I don't have any specific campaign plans, Brad said, but I will always speak up when I see policies that hurt vulnerable people, especially children. That's not about politics, it's about basic human decency. Applause broke out from parts of the audience. Brad noticed some people remained still, their faces showing disapproval. Karoline smiled tightly. Basic human decency also includes respecting the democratic process and the choices of the American people. This administration was elected to bring change, not to continue failed policies that you and your Hollywood friends support. The American people didn't vote to hurt children, Brad replied, his voice rising slightly. And they certainly didn't vote for lies about what these budget cuts really mean. Martha stepped between them again. I really think we should... Lies? Karoline interrupted, her eyes flashing with anger. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Pitt. This administration has been transparent about every policy decision. Brad let out a short laugh. Transparent? Is that what you call it when you rename budget cuts as efficiency measures or program adjustments? People see through that kind of talk. The tension in the room was now thick enough to cut with a knife. Several security personnel moved closer to the stage. Brad noticed Karoline's 2 security men standing at alert near the steps. What people see, Karoline said coldly, is celebrities like you using your fame to push political agendas while living lives completely disconnected from reality. When was the last time you waited in line at a grocery store or worried about paying your bills? You don't know anything about my life, Brad said, and you're using personal attacks to avoid talking about the actual policies. A woman in the audience stood up suddenly. Ms. Leavitt is right. Hollywood should stay out of politics. This prompted another audience member to stand. No, Brad. He's right, these budget cuts are hurting real people. Martha rushed to the microphone. Please, everyone, this is a charity event for children. Let's remember why we're here. But the room had already split into 2 sides. More people were standing, some calling out support for Brad, others for Karoline. The elegant charity gala was turning into something that looked more like a political rally. Brad glanced at his watch. It was nearly 10:30 p.m. This event had gone on long enough, and the important part, raising money for the charity, had already been accomplished. He decided it was time to end this before it got worse. Look, he said, raising his voice to be heard over the growing noise in the room, we clearly have different views on how to help children. But can we at least agree that all children deserve food, shelter, education, and health care? Can we start there? Karoline hesitated, then nodded. Of course all children deserve those things. The question is how best to provide them. Then let's focus on that, Brad said, not on attacking each other personally. For a moment it seemed like the tension might ease. Martha looked relieved, and was about to speak when Richard Thornton called out again from his table. Ms. Leavitt, would you say Mr. Pitt's comments tonight represent the anti-administration attitude of Hollywood elites? The question was clearly designed to reignite the conflict. Brad shot Richard an annoyed look, but Karoline was already answering. Absolutely, she said. Mr. Pitt, like many in Hollywood, seems to think his fame gives him special insight into complex policy issues. But making movies doesn't qualify someone to understand economic policy or government programs. Brad felt his patience finally running out. And reading talking points doesn't qualify someone to understand the real impact of those policies on actual children. The audience reacted strongly, with some cheering and others booing. Camera flashes were going off constantly now. The truth, Karoline continued, raising her voice over the noise, is that Hollywood celebrities like Mr. Pitt live in a bubble of wealth and privilege. They fly private jets while lecturing ordinary Americans about sacrifice. They have security teams while opposing border security for the country. They send their children to exclusive private schools while claiming to support public education. Brad stood up from his chair. This is ridiculous. I came here tonight to support a charity that helps children, not to be used as a political punching bag. Running away from the discussion, Mr. Pitt? Karoline asked, with a challenging smile. That's what happens when Hollywood fantasy meets political reality. The crowd grew even louder. Martha was trying desperately to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. The charity event had been completely derailed. Brad looked out at the sea of faces, some angry, some supportive, all watching to see what would happen next. Camera phones were pointed at him from every direction. Whatever he did next would be online within minutes and on morning news shows by tomorrow. He had to make a choice about how this story would end. Brad stood on the stage, aware that hundreds of eyes were watching his every move. His jaw was tight and he could feel his heart beating faster. He had been in the public eye for decades, but this was different. This wasn't about a movie or his personal life. This was about something more important. I'm not running away from anything, Ms. Leavitt, Brad said, his voice calm but firm. But I'm not going to let this charity event turn into a political circus either. Karoline remained seated, looking up at him with a confident smile. The American people deserve to hear honest debate, Mr. Pitt. Or is that too uncomfortable for you? Martha Wilson stepped between them again. Please, both of you, this event is about helping children in need. But neither Brad nor Karoline was listening to Martha anymore. The room had become divided into two sides, with people calling out support for one or the other. Security guards were now moving through, the crowd trying to calm the most vocal guests. Richard Thornton stood up again from his table. Mr. Pitt, do you believe your Hollywood colleagues should be more or less involved in political discourse? The question was clearly meant to keep the conflict going. Brad could see several news reporters scribbling notes furiously. This story was already taking shape in their minds. Hollywood star clashes with White House spokesperson. I believe everyone has the right to speak their mind, Brad said, addressing the whole room rather than just Richard. Actor or not. That's what America is supposed to be about. But this event tonight is supposed to be about helping children, not scoring political points. Karoline stood up now too, smoothing her navy blue dress. No one is trying to score political points, Mr. Pitt. I'm simply pointing out that there's a disconnect between Hollywood's public statements and the realities facing everyday Americans. Brad turned to face her directly. You've been trying to turn this into a political attack from the moment we sat down at the same table. I came here to support a charity. You came here to push talking points. Gasps spread through the audience. No one had expected Brad to be so direct. Karoline's face flushed slightly, but her professional smile never wavered. I came here for the same reason you did, she said, to support a good cause. But I won't stand by while you use this platform to criticize policies you don't fully understand. Martha tried once more to regain control. Please, can we all just take a breath and remember why we're here? The children? Yes, the children. Brad interrupted, his patience finally gone. Let's talk about the real impact of your administration's policies on actual children. Not the talking points, not the spin, but the reality. He turned to face the audience. Did you know that last month, the free lunch program that fed over 2 million kids was cut by 30%? Did you know that 27 after-school programs in low-income areas were closed completely? These aren't numbers on a budget spreadsheet. These are real children who are hungry and have nowhere safe to go after school. The room grew quieter as Brad spoke. Even those who had been loudly supporting Karoline were listening now. That's simply not accurate, Karoline said, her voice taking on the formal tone she used in press briefings. Those programs weren't cut, they were restructured to eliminate waste and fraud. Brad laughed, but there was no humor in it. Restructured? Is that what you call it when a child who used to get a hot lunch now gets nothing? When a safe place to do homework becomes a closed door with a "sorry, no funding" sign on it? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. I visited one of these restructured programs last month. Would you like to see the pictures of the empty cafeteria? Or maybe hear from the single mother who now has to choose between going to work and leaving her kids alone because the after-school program closed? Karoline's smile tightened. Individual stories, while touching, don't represent the full picture of policy impacts. The administration has created thousands of new jobs that help families support themselves rather than relying on government assistance. Those jobs don't help the 8-year-old who's hungry today, Brad shot back. And they certainly don't help kids whose parents already work multiple jobs but still can't make ends meet. Richard Thornton called out again. Ms. Leavitt, how would you respond to critics who say the administration prioritizes tax cuts for the wealthy over programs for needy children? Brad could see what was happening. Richard was deliberately pouring fuel on the fire, probably hoping for explosive quotes he could use on his news networks. This whole situation was getting out of control. Karoline answered Richard confidently. Those critics are ignoring economic realities. Tax cuts stimulate growth, which creates jobs and prosperity for all Americans, including families with children. The previous administration's approach of endless government programs created dependency, not opportunity. She turned back to Brad. Not everyone can live in a multi-million-dollar mansion or own multiple homes around the world, Mr. Pitt. Most Americans have to live within their means, and so does their government. The personal attack hung in the air. Several people in the Yao audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Brad took a deep breath. This isn't about me or my homes. It's about children who need help. And if you can't see that, then there's no point continuing this conversation. Running away won't change the facts, Karoline said. The American people support this administration's approach, even if Hollywood doesn't. Martha Wilson stepped between them again. Please, both of you. This isn't helping anyone, especially not the children we're here to support. Brad looked at Martha's worried face and felt a wave of regret. This good woman had spent months planning this charity event, and now it had turned into a political battlefield. The important work of raising money for children in need was being overshadowed by this clash. He looked out at the audience again. Some people looked angry, others uncomfortable, and many were still recording everything on their phones. This whole scene would be all over social media within the hour. The charity's important message would be lost in the noise of political argument. Brad made his decision. He turned to Martha. I'm sorry, Martha, this isn't what your event deserves. You raised over $3 million tonight for children who need it. That should be the story, not this. He unpinned the small microphone from his lapel and handed it to Martha. Then he turned to Karoline. Ms. Leavitt, we clearly have different views on how to help children in need. I hope someday you'll actually visit some of these programs and meet the kids they serve. It might change your perspective. Before Karoline could respond, Brad stepped away from his chair and walked toward the steps at the side of the stage. The room erupted in noise, some people calling for him to stay, others shouting questions, and many just talking loudly to each other about what was happening. Mr. Pitt, Richard Thornton called out. Are you refusing to engage in debate with Ms. Leavitt? Brad stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back. The room quieted again, everyone waiting to hear what he would say. This isn't a debate, Mr. Thornton. It's a charity event that you and Ms. Leavitt are trying to turn into political theater. I came here to help children, not to help your ratings. With those words, Brad descended the steps and began walking toward the exit, ignoring the reporters who jumped up to follow him and the camera flashes that lit up the room like lightning. Behind him on stage, Karoline stood with a satisfied smile watching him leave. Brad pushed through the double doors at the back of the ballroom, his security team quickly moving to surround him. The hallway outside was quieter, but he could still hear the noise from the ballroom behind him. His face felt hot, and he loosened his bow tie with one quick pull. Get the car, he said to his head of security, a tall man named Mike who had worked with him for over 10 years. Mike nodded and spoke quietly into his wrist microphone. Brad walked quickly down the hallway toward the service exit. He didn't want to go back through the main lobby where more reporters might be waiting. 3 hotel staff members stood near the service door, their eyes wide with surprise as Brad Pitt and his security team approached. Good evening, Brad said with a nod, trying to stay polite despite his anger. The staff moved aside quickly, and one held the door open. Brad stepped out into the cool night air, taking a deep breath. The service area was empty except for a few parked delivery trucks. Car will be here in 2 minutes, Mike said, checking his phone. Are you okay? Brad shook his head. Not really. That whole thing was a setup. Before Mike could respond, the service door opened again and Martha Wilson hurried out looking upset. Brad, please wait, she called, moving toward him with surprising speed for a woman in her 60s wearing high heels. Brad turned to face her. Martha, I'm sorry about what happened in there. That wasn't what I wanted for your event. Martha reached him and touched his arm gently. It wasn't your fault. I had no idea Karoline would turn this into a political showdown. Richard Thornton didn't help either, asking those provocative questions. Thornton knew exactly what he was doing. Brad said, his news networks will be playing clips from this all week. Hollywood star storms out makes for good ratings. Martha sighed. I feel terrible. I asked you to come support our charity and this happens. Brad's expression softened. Hey, the important thing is you raised over $3 million tonight. That's what matters. Those kids will get the help they need. Martha smiled sadly. You're right, and your matching pledge was incredibly generous. A black SUV pulled up to the service area, and Mike opened the back door. Your car, sir. Brad turned back to Martha. I should go, but please know I still support your work 100%. Martha surprised him by giving him a quick hug. Thank you, Brad. Not just for the money, but for standing up for what you believe in. Brad nodded and was about to get into the car when the service door banged open again. A group of reporters rushed out, led by Richard Thornton. Camera flashes immediately began going off. Mr. Pitt, why did you walk out on Ms. Leavitt? One reporter called. Do you regret your comments about the administration? Asked another. Richard. Thornton moved to the front of the group. Brad, would you say this shows the unwillingness of Hollywood to engage with different political viewpoints? Brad stopped, 1 foot already in the car. He looked at the group of reporters with their cameras and microphones pointed at him. It would be easy to just get in the car and drive away. But something about Thornton's smug expression made him pause. You want to comment, Richard? Here's one, Brad said, turning to face the reporters fully. What happened in there wasn't a political discussion. It was an ambush. You and Ms. Leavitt turned a charity event for children into a political circus. Is that what journalism has become these days? Creating conflict for ratings? Richard's smile faded. We're simply covering an important public exchange between... No, Brad interrupted. You were trying to create a story instead of reporting one. This event was supposed to be about helping children in need. Instead, you made it about politics. The other reporters were scribbling notes rapidly and cameras continued to flash. Brad knew his words would be all over the news tomorrow, but he no longer cared. Some things needed to be said. Mr. Pitt, called a young female reporter at the back of the group. Do you regret speaking up about the budget cuts to children's programs? Brad shook his head. Not for a second. Those cuts will hurt real children. Someone needs to speak up for them. Even if it means being called a Hollywood elite who's out of touch, she pressed. I'd rather be called names than stay silent when kids are going hungry, Brad replied. My personal life has nothing to do with whether children deserve food and health care. Another reporter raised his hand. Ms. Leavitt is still inside giving comments. She says you left because you couldn't defend your positions with facts. Your response? Brad almost laughed. I left because a charity event shouldn't be a political battlefield. But if Ms. Leavitt wants facts, I'm happy to meet her anytime to discuss the actual numbers behind these program cuts. Just not at a charity event. Mike leaned close to Brad's ear. Sir, we should go. More reporters are coming. Brad nodded and turned back to Martha, who was watching with a mix of worry and admiration. Keep doing the good work, Martha, he said. The children need people like you. Then he climbed into the SUV and closed the door. The reporters surged forward, still calling questions, but the car pulled away quickly, leaving them behind. Inside the car, Brad leaned back against the leather seat and closed his eyes. His phone was already buzzing with messages and calls. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. "The airport," Brad replied. "I need to get back to Los Angeles." As the car moved through the Washington, D.C. streets, Brad's phone rang again. It was his publicist, Jen. "I'm watching the live stream," Jen said when he answered. "It's everywhere already. Social media is blowing up." "How bad is it?" Brad asked, rubbing his forehead. "Actually, it's mixed. Some people are criticizing you for walking out, but many more are supporting you for standing up for children's programs. Your comments outside about the event being turned into a political circus are getting a lot of positive reaction." Brad looked out the window at the passing city lights. "I didn't go there looking for a fight, Jen." "I know that," she said. "But the video of you talking about those kids who lost their school lunches and after-school programs, it's powerful stuff. People are sharing it like crazy." Brad was quiet for a moment. "What's Karoline Leavitt saying now?" "She's giving a press conference in the hotel lobby. Standard talking points about Hollywood being out of touch. But honestly, you come across as the more genuine one in the videos." The SUV stopped at a red light, and Brad saw a digital billboard on a nearby building. It was already showing a news alert with his and Karoline's pictures side by side, with the headline, "Hollywood vs. White House, Pitt storms out after clash with Leavitt." "This is going to be the story all week, isn't it?" Brad asked. "Probably," Jen admitted. "But maybe that's not a bad thing. Those budget cuts weren't getting much attention before tonight. Now everyone's talking about them." As the SUV continued toward the airport, Brad's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Martha Wilson. "Just wanted you to know," the message read. "After you left, we received another $1 million in donations. Many people were moved by what you said about the children. Sometimes standing up for what's right causes a stir, but it also inspires action. Thank you." Brad smiled slightly as he read the message. Maybe some good would come from this clash after all. The important thing was that more children would get the help they needed. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. He opened it to see a video clip of Karoline Leavitt speaking to reporters in the hotel lobby. "Mr. Pitt's dramatic exit shows what happens when Hollywood fantasy meets political reality," she was saying with a confident smile. "The American people know the difference between celebrity opinions and actual policy expertise." Brad closed the video and put his phone away. There would be time to respond to all this tomorrow. For now, he just wanted to get home and get some sleep. As the SUV approached the airport, he noticed people in other cars looking at their phones and then glancing over at his vehicle. The story was spreading faster than he could have imagined. The clash with Karoline Leavitt wasn't what he had planned for this evening, but if it brought attention to the children who needed help, maybe it was worth it after all. Sometimes, Brad thought, walking away from a fight was actually the best way to win it.